Good evening. I'm Ann Wetherell. I'm on the board of the Northwest China Council and work on programs such as the one that we're seeing tonight. This is the third and final installment in our series on Drink in China, which I think is profiled in the newsletter, or at least some of it's profiled in the newsletter if you have it. Thank you. There. Yeah, excellent. The project started looking at history, essentially looking at the earliest beer that was ever discovered in China from a Neolithic tomb in 7000 BCE. Our second program was with Michelle Lee of Vin Distillery in Wilsonville, who talked about the baijiu and distilled liquor and its use in Chinese culture. And finally, for our third project, we're really excited to have Janis Miglavs, who's going to be talking about Chinese wine. And so bringing all of the things that we've heard about really up to the present and linking China and Oregon. Janis was born in Latvia, one of 3 Baltic countries on the west coast of Russia. He learned English when he started school in the United States.
I learned Chinese in 2009. My 4 words.
He grew up through high school in Napa, and he did pick grapes during the summer for college money, which may have actually led to your interest in wine. Graduated from UC Berkeley during the Vietnam War protest years. He has received a master's degree in drawing and painting, and then taught photography and drawing for 10 years in Bella Vista High School. The description of his travels, if you go to his website and his blogs, are extremely interesting, but he's traveled to at least 30 countries around the world. And since the year 2000 has spent extensive time in Africa documenting mythology of some tribes there. His connection with China is since 2009. He has written a book called China, the New Wine Frontier, which is back there, but has been invited by Chinese wineries from Xinjiang to Shandong province, essentially, to come out and document the production of wine in China. He is also the author of an award-winning book on Oregon wine. The Taste of Wine won numerous awards, including a gold for best regional book in North America. The other book that he has authored is Pacific Northwest, The Ultimate Winery Guide. He has an interesting story about being in China and discovering was it the Oregon wine book that was in a Chinese bookstore?
To find out that it won an award over there.
Yeah. So please join me in welcoming Janis Miglavs.
Okay, first of all, I've got to say, I apologize because I'm supposed to stay in the light. They're filming this thing, and if I get out of the light, then the film goes noisy. And so I'm used to walking around with the audience and things like that, so I apologize. So first of all, how many people here are wine kind of people? Oh, that's pretty good. How many people here have had a Chinese wine? You know, that's way more than usually I see out of 60 people, 2 hands go up. How many people have had something else besides Great Wall wine? Wow, you guys are sophisticated. How many people here have ever been to a Chinese winery? I've never been. Never been. Oh, no, how many people have been? Have been. 2 people. Wow. That's a record for me because usually nobody raises their hands on that. So tonight I don't know which wineries you've been to, but the people that haven't been to a Chinese winery, you're going to be absolutely blown away. So I got to put on my glasses so I can see what I'm supposed to talk about. So my name is, like Ann said, my name is Janis Miglavs, and the first name is pronounced Janis, like you're yawning. And when I was learning English, I found out that Janis is a lady's name over here, but that's okay. So this is kind of my philosophy about traveling. So where's this chateau? France. It's China. Yeah, Tianjin. Yeah, Dynasty Winery. So, surprised? So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to explore what happens when one of the world's oldest civilizations rediscovers wine. And like the beer, there's evidence that there was fermented wine back, 9,000 years ago. So it's a rediscovery. Of course, there was a long dry period, but it's a rediscovery. So Chinese wineries like to copy Western things, especially French. And so why emulate France? Well, we're going to find that out. So one of the byproducts of the new China wine industry is like newly married couples want to get their photographs taken in a winery. Yeah, that's a winery. You're looking at a Chinese winery right there. And that couple paid $700 to have their photograph taken there. Plus, they paid the photographer. And the photographer wouldn't tell me how much he got paid. Okay. And the photographers are out there clicking at these wineries. I mean, they're processing harvested grapes in the background back there. And you can see the photographers working away, 30 feet from where they're working the grapes. So some of the wineries will build huge Disneyland-like chateau to attract the nouveau middle class, camera-toting tourists. And the wineries want to change these guys into wine-buying customers by attracting them to this kind of Disneyland-like atmosphere. So you need to, next to your chateau, you need to have a European-style village in China. And this is the courtyard of the village. And the manager tells me that what they were trying to do is trying to mimic a kind of a combination between an Italian and a French village. And of course, the winery needs a faux church for weddings, even though, like if you've been to China, there's not many Chinese that are Christian. But again, what they're doing is they're copying Western ways. And what winery should be without a shooting range? Or a bowling alley? And an Olympic-sized swimming pool? And I'm not going to show you the archery range and the golf and those kinds of things. And then, what would be a winery without a place to drop off the kid at the fully equipped playroom here, and there's a staff that'll entertain the kids while you go out tasting wine and doing whatever you're doing. So at the end of the day, if you've had one too many tastings, there are comfy hotel rooms in the fake European village that you can sleep it off. The only thing is, just be careful, don't fall out of the round bed. Okay? And in the morning, you can walk off your hangover by going through this lacy promenade here, and that's the chateau in the background. And just to kind of give you scale, you can see, use my pointer, do you see the little guy there on a bicycle? I mean, the place is huge. So it's a long walk. So hope your hangover wasn't too bad. And what winery should be without a nightly light show on your building? And since Western-style grape wine is new for most Chinese, some wineries kind of include an educational component. They're trying to teach the Chinese people about how to taste wine. And so that happens to be my personal assistant there, and he happens to be the vineyard manager of the largest winery in China, and he's carrying my tripod. Pretty good, huh? And so no tasting room should be without a medieval ironclad knights, 2 knights, to guard the entrance. And of course, no winery should be without a little cherub offering grapes to the bare-breasted European maiden. And foreign wineries, especially the French, are joint venturing with Chinese wineries to establish vineyards and wineries. And just across the valley is a Scottish castle that's built by an English businessman who lives in Hong Kong. But then this wouldn't be China without the farmers commuting to the fields by cow-drawn carts. And then the commuter cow is unhooked and used to work in the vineyard. And the farmers are growing in between the rows of Cabernet Sauvignon. They're growing peanuts here. And you'll see that over and over and over, utilizing every space of land. Families bury their deceased parents in the vineyard. Those are grave marks, or gravestones. And you see that a lot in vineyards, not like where tourists go or anything like that, but like when you get out into the vineyards, you see that really often. This is one that blows me away. So the winery staff hand gluing 3-piece labels onto 1 million wine bottles. So like there's no machines here, like when labor is so cheap. But then move over, France. The Chinese now consume more red wine than any other country in the world. And just consider that they've just started the modern era winemaking and wine introduction process. So I'd be absolutely remiss if I didn't teach you, and probably a lot of you have experienced this one, if I didn't teach you the secret to drinking wine in China. Okay, so I go to a lot of dinners, and so here's how we drink wine. Okay? And it's amazing. The guy on your left, he's a general manager, and the guy on your right is, he's one of the leading wine experts in China. I won't tell you their names. So in China, they call this gambei. And when you're like, I go to a lot of dinners, and when you go to dinners, you might have like 20 gambeis. And so like, when I first started going, it's like, you fill it up, 4 ounces and all that stuff. And I was thinking, man, I'm not going to last very long here. And so the secret is to just have them pour just a little bit of wine in your glass. And then you can do your 20 gambeis and still walk to your room that night instead of being carried. But for me, a more important lesson that I relearned in China was from the vineyard workers. And the way they treated me reminded me what an elder had taught me in a remote African tribe 15 years ago. So this is a lesson that, kind of stays with me, and you'll see it throughout the show. So this is China, a new wine frontier. And this whole project actually started, like I wanted to go to China. And I thought, okay, what kind of an excuse could I come up with to go to China? And I thought, well, I wonder if they have wineries there. And lo and behold, they did. So that's how this whole thing started in 2009. So in search of Chinese wineries, we're going to journey across, like a country that's about the same size as the United States. And so we're going to start here in Beijing. I'm looking at this from the side. And then we're going to go down here to Yunnan, to this tiny little area right here that probably has the highest and steepest vineyards in the world. And then we're going to go here in Xinjiang. And here we're going to visit vineyards that are really near the Silk Road. And as a treat tonight, you're going to hear how Marco Polo rated the Xinjiang wines. So don't tell anyone what you heard here tonight, okay? And then we're going to go to the heartland, to Ningxia. We're going to come from Xinjiang to Ningxia right here, to the heart of the country. And just kind of like, this is the Yellow River here, and that's the lifeblood of that particular province. And here in Ningxia, I was absolutely blown away. They're trying to make like a Napa wine route in the dusty desert. So we'll take a look at that. So we'll start in Yunnan. And again, we're only going to visit this tiny little area right here. There's other wine areas down in here, but we're only going to go here, next to Tibet. Here's, Bhutan, Burma, here, these southern countries here. Okay, so in Yunnan, we'll experience what it takes to grow wine grapes in just what might be the steepest and the highest vineyards in the world. And elevations are like I don't have an altimeter or anything like that, but I think the elevations are about 9,000 feet. Oops, wrong one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go along with the general manager of the Shangri-La Winery, and we're going to travel these roads, and he's going out to check on harvests. And you're going to see what an adventure traveling in this part of the Yunnan really is. So some of the roads are kind of narrow, and we're not the only vehicle out there. And cars and trucks break down all the time on this thing. And sometimes, like this guy broke a steering rod, and his truck went right across the road. No one could pass. So everyone jumps out, offering advice. Oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, And there's no AAA here. And the nearest garage is a full day's drive away from here. And so, like, here they are fixing the steering rod right on the spot. And then sometimes on the roads you can't be in a hurry because of the traffic. Oh yeah, and like the driver, like these are his prayer beads right here. Just kind of keep perspective here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to follow the Langkang River, which becomes the Mekong in Vietnam. And we're going to pass like these terraced villages which seem like they're glued to the landscape. And so the elevations that we're going to be at are between 6,000 and 8,000 or 9,000 feet. And these are vineyards right here. Not a lot of flat land. And I have to throw this in because like these guys were so nice. Like Chinese are really heavy smokers, and including Mr. Kui, the general manager. And so they didn't smoke while we were driving. I mean, they were very, very nice. That's not the case all the time. And then every time I wanted to stop, like they would jump out of the car, light up, and they would hope that I would take photographs long enough that they could finish their cigarette. And one of the few Chinese words that I know is stop, ting. And so in this landscape, man, I was constantly ting, 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 stop. And the guys would jump out, light up, and then, like I'd get my photographs, and I'd wait till they finished their smokes, and then we'd all head on. So this is Tibetan Buddhist country here. It's a monastery. There are prayer flags, prayer wheels. And this isn't for tourists. I mean, there are, maybe there's a few Chinese tourists in this area, but it isn't like a tourist mecca. I mean, these are real people doing their real everyday kinds of things. And there's paintings of spirits to kind of remind you to keep, proper perspective on life here. And so this is Bang Village, and that's the Langkang here, and you can see our road here, and there's actually a little bridge right here. And through special deals, the Shangri-La Winery has changed the whole economy of this region. So before in Bang, all the flat land was devoted to growing food. And now, because Shangri-La Winery is paying cash for grapes, for wine grapes, look at all the grapes they're growing where they used to grow food. It's a huge area. Here's the bridge that we crossed. So in most parts of the world, wine grapes are usually grown at elevation below 3,000 feet. That's like the maximum kind of range. Here in the Willamette Valley, until recently with climate change, it's been about 800 feet. And below that, or above that, it's just too cold for the grapes to ripen. And here in this area, they're growing at 6,000 to 9,000 feet. And the reason why is the latitude is so low. If this was at sea level, it would be, in Fahrenheit, it'd be like 110 degrees with 100-degree humidity. And that's why. Oh, and just, those are glaciers. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon, oops, sorry. Cabernet Sauvignon vineyard here. Here's our general manager. And here's the Langkang, kind of winding its way through these razor-like mountains. Oh, and here's our road right here. It's an amazing country. How many, just out of curiosity, how many people have been to Yunnan? Have you been up into this area here? Have you? Yeah. Oh, okay. That's more down. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think I just messed up my clicker. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to visit a village, and we're going to take a look at harvest. And again, for perspective, that's our road there, and that's the Langkang. Oh, and take a look. That Langkang isn't exactly crystal clear. It's muddy because it's just scouring the earth, you know, on its way down. And the landscape obviously is steep, and sometimes you need to get a ladder just to go from one terrace, you know, to another. And the Chinese tend to be conservative in their choice of grape varieties, and they are going for the typical French Bordeaux red varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And so here, that's the Langkang down below, almost straight down, almost straight down. I mean, if you were to run really fast and not stop fast enough, you'd be down quite a long ways. And so this guy's carrying, each one of those crates loaded with grapes weighs about 40 pounds. It's 20 kilos, so 44 pounds. And so he's got 2 of them. So do the math. You know, and I'm not sure I could smile if I was carrying 88 pounds of grapes up that kind of slope. And take a look at this guy. He's got 3 of them. Again, do the math. 3 times, you know, 44 pounds. That's more than the guy weighs, I think. I mean, look at the little guy. So the thing that amazes me, and amazed me here, is like these guys are lugging these crates up these steep slopes, and then they're having lunch. I walk by, and they invite me to join them for lunch with my 20 words of Chinese. And I'm kind of embarrassed because like the camera that's around my neck is worth more than 5, 10 years of their wages. You know, so it's a little embarrassing. But they're not embarrassed at all. They just invite me to have lunch with, you know, with them. So then it's organize the crates so they can be transported to a Shangri-La collection point. And so the only level area that Shangri-La can collect all the grapes is in the middle of the road. So there's 30 families that have brought their harvested grapes, and this is what it looks like. And they come in any kind of a vehicle that they can muster up. I mean, dump trucks, those little 2-stroke tractors, anything that they can muster up, they're hauling these grapes in, you know, for the pickup. And so one of the main jobs, here's the general manager, one of his main jobs is to raise the quality of grapes. And so he spends a lot of time teaching these farmers like what he thinks is a good quality grape. And it's a long educational process. And you know, I was just looking at this landscape. I mean, take a look at the landscape behind them. I mean, it's just like there's nothing level out there. Let's see, this was September, toward the end of September. And there's a lot of heated discussion when it comes to talking about quality, because these guys get paid not only on the weight, but also on the quality. So a lot of arguing, a lot of heated discussion. And then the quality is noted, then the grapes are weighed, and it's all recorded in this little notebook. So I'd heard about, like, in this area, I'd heard about a Catholic church that was built in the mid-1800s, and I'd heard that there still might be some leftovers of a vineyard that the French missionaries had planted in the 1800s. So I wanted to go see that. So to do that, we had to cross, here's the Langkang, and we had to cross on this thin little bridge. Okay, a little technical issue here. So I looked at those. I'm in the car, and I'm looking at those thin little cables, and I'm looking at the wood planks that the bridge, is that we're going to drive across. And then I think, okay, I know that this bridge was built by a contractor that either bribed the officials or it's a relative of the local officials. So I'm thinking, God, do I want to be in this car crossing that bridge? But, the guy said it was okay, so I stayed and crossed. So this is the village that we're going to go to visit, Chizhong. These are Cabernet Sauvignon grapes here. Here's the church that we're going to see. And here's, this is rice here. So even though the electricity in there is really sporadic, at night we never had electricity in this village. But everybody's got a cell phone. I mean, everybody. So we stayed with the village school teacher, and he's a Buddhist. He's making his morning offering of some cedar in this little kind of oven thing. That's a real traditional Buddhist, kind of a thing. He's got his prayer flags, and then here's the church. And that's why we decided to stay with him, because we could see the church from his place. And so our host offered us warm yak milk and local wine. And I was talking with someone about like local wine. And this is local wine right here. And this is yak milk. How many people here have ever had yak milk? Wow, you guys are pretty adventuresome. Good for you. The next question is, did you like it? I had it like pretty much every day, 2 or 3 times a day, like while I was in Yunnan. So after a while, yes, oh yeah, it's very nice. And so his wife, the teacher's wife, would fix us meals in her kitchen. And I mean, take a look at that kitchen. My wife looks at that and she says, wow, I wouldn't mind having a kitchen like that. So this is the Catholic Church, and with a modern day vineyard right here. Is probably cab. And take a look at when it was built. And the church was partially destroyed by some Tibetan warlords, like in the late 1800s. And then when it was rebuilt, the missionaries kind of put this Chinese flair on the top. And so we're going to go inside the church. We're going to answer that in just a moment. So here's the inside of that church. And the thing that amazes me, I mean, this went through the Cultural Revolution. This went through all kinds of turmoil in China, and it survived. It survived. And so you asked if they have church. Yes, they do. And you got to remember, this is Tibetan Buddhist country. And here are the regular parishioners right here. I think there was 4 ladies that regularly attended the church. They were Buddhist, but they went to Catholic church. This is our general manager. He also went. So yes, they do. Actually, every evening they held a service there. And so here's the altar with plastic Christmas trees that are there all year around. So I guess it kind of reminds you of Christmas. And then the weirdest thing that I've probably seen in China is, this is remote China, it's Buddhist country, and here's Santa Claus next to some plastic, greens here with angels and cherubs and stuff. I mean, it was just amazing to see that. So the French missionaries, being French, needed a place to store their sacramental wine. And so they actually dug a wine cellar. But it kind of looks like all the sacramental wine is gone, and it probably has been for the last 100 years. Underneath, actually, I didn't show you, but there's some outbuildings next to the church. It like makes a whole courtyard, and this wine cellar is in one of those outbuildings. It's not underneath the church. But let's see, how far did that go? No, it didn't go like it went back a little ways, but it didn't go as far as underneath the church. I mean, like they're missionaries, so they got to kind of keep it out of the church area. So think of yourself as a French missionary, and for sacramental wine, you've got to wait for your shipment to come from France. So it's coming by burro, it's coming by who knows how in the 1800s. And so like it took months. So these French missionaries said, hey, wait a minute, why don't we just plant our own grapes and let's make our own sacramental wine for religious purposes, of course. So the roots here, like this it was totally neglected, this vineyard. And the vines are relatively young. Like I kind of estimated them to be about 15 years. But I was told that actually the roots are the original roots that the French missionaries had planted. And the grape variety it's called rose honey. You know, how many people have ever heard of rose honey? Yeah. You can find it in France, and you can find it, I found one other vineyard in a more northern part of China that had rose honey. And like since I showed so much interest in this vineyard, like the priest and then some of the villagers who were kind of hanging around, and the Shangri-La's general manager thought, man, you know, it would be really a good idea to kind of revive this, take care of this vineyard, and let's make some local wine from it. And I'm actually thinking it would be a great marketing thing if the wine was halfway decent, is to have wine made from 1800 era grapes. I mean, what a marketing ploy. So we leave the church in the mountains of Yunnan province, and we're going to go to other parts of China. So next, we're going to go from Yunnan here, up here, to Xinjiang. And so here, we're going to go to vineyards that are, again, like near the Silk Roads. And again, Marco Polo passed through this area, and apparently they were growing wine grapes here. They might have been making them from the table grapes, but Marco Polo, in his journal, actually rated the wines. So wait till you hear what his ratings are. So it's officially called the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and that's because like the largest ethnic group, and that's changing really fast, are the Uyghurs. And this whole area, I've got to tell you, it's larger than California, Oregon, Washington, and Texas combined. So like that Xinjiang province is huge. It's huge. Most of it looks like this. The area that we're going to visit is dominated by these mountains, the Tian Shan mountains. And the range here is, it's about a little bit more than twice the height of Mount Hood. And historically, this range actually impeded the migration of humans into that area for thousands of years because it was such a formidable thing. And just recently I found out too that part of this range goes up into the Uzbekistan, and there's one of the peaks is called Vladimir Putin Peak. So Putin's really getting around. Okay, and so today, the Tian Shan Mountains, like the importance is like all the water for all the agriculture comes from the mountains, from snow melt and from glacier melt, and then going down into the ground. So we're going to land in Urumqi, or some people call it Wulamuchi. And these are the Tian Shan Mountains here. And this yellow stuff right here, pollution. Yeah. And the place is booming. It's absolutely booming. And people are moving out here to the west because there's a lot of jobs out here. There's a lot of coal going on. There's a lot of agriculture going on, so a lot of people are moving out here. But not all is peaceful in Xinjiang. So on each one of the trips that I've taken out there, a day or two before, there's been terrorist bombing. In fact, the last trip that I took in May, gosh, a couple days before, there was a Starbucks-like cafe where 31 people were killed in that bombing. And my Chinese friends, they all say, you shouldn't go out to Xinjiang because of all the terrorist activity. One thing I want you to notice here, too, is like here's the Chinese lettering, and here's some Arabic for the Uyghurs are Muslim. But they're not like, they drink wine. And so although it's called the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, like the Uyghurs really don't feel that autonomy. And so then, like terrorists, are doing the bombing and stuff. But most people just want to live their lives. And the streets are vibrant with nightlife here. And like the food is fabulous. You go out and you pick your food, and then they barbecue it right on the spot. And it's really, really good. And somebody was talking about, going to China and worrying about the food. I never once in 5 years of going there have ever gotten sick from the food. And I eat in all of these places, right here. I do look and make sure that the restaurant has other people there. If I don't see anybody there, then I know the locals know that somebody has gotten sick or something, so that's just, if there's other people eating there, I'm right there. And so the entertainment is provided by like the owner's friends on a classical 2-string dutar. It's really amazing what you can do with 2 strings. And so here's the husband and wife owners in the kitchen. And I do want you to notice, like, who's doing the food prep here? Yes, these are Uyghurs, actually. And so here's like a typical dinner that I would have there. And I mean, it is really good food. The Uyghurs really love lamb, so this is lamb here. So this little series is just to kind of remind me about how most people just want to live their lives, and have the good life. So driving out into the vineyards, everything seems peaceful in the countryside. But the government is building like entire villages out here for what they call farmer soldiers. And these are going to be Han that they take out from the east. And the Han are the dominant ethnic group in China. And so these farmer soldiers, during the summer, they're working in the fields. And in the winter, they train as soldiers. And the creative names for these villages, this village is called 121 Village. The previous village was called, I can't remember if it's 252 or 253 Village. I mean, great names. And so here, these are farmer soldiers pruning the vines. And the vineyards in Xinjiang are the largest in all of Asia, and they're among the largest, if not the largest, in the world. And you can see the Tian Shan mountains there, and a little energy plant here. I believe that's actually a coal-fired plant. Yeah, it looks like a nuke plant, but I believe, I'm not an expert, but I believe this one is a coal-fired plant. There are a lot of nuke plants out there. Like Beijing wants to have all the dangerous stuff way out in the west, so if something blows, it's a long ways from Beijing to here. So one of the biggest problems in this area are roving sand dunes. And so here workers are building kind of lattice work to keep this sand dune from eating up this road here. And you can actually see, like, here's the vineyard, here's a sand dune, and the vineyard goes right up to the sand dune. They plant these trees, you know, as a windbreak, and then also to kind of keep the sand dune in place. But it's a huge issue. And when you fly over the area, you can see, like, sand dunes eating entire agricultural areas. It's just like an ocean wave going across. And here are the mountains right here where all the water comes from. So these guys use flood irrigation. But the more important thing I want you to notice is take a look at how these vines are kind of bent like this. And the reason why they're bent like that is they have to bury their vines in the winter because it's so cold out there that the vines would die if they didn't bury them under, depending on what area, like, you know, a foot to 2 feet of, 18 inches to 2 feet of earth. So, like, that's something to be thinking about out, you know, out here. Fortunately, right now, labor is cheap. And when I was first going there, is like none of the wineries were worried about burying the vines. This last time I went, some of the more astute winery general managers were saying, you know, pretty soon, like, our wages are going to keep going on up, and we need to figure out how to bury these things in some other way than having hundreds of people throwing dirt on these vines. Oops, wrong one.
So do they prune the vines all the way down to the root, basically?
No, not at all. That's a good question. No, like the vines, they'll leave them, maybe prune it about here. So no, they don't prune it down to they just bend them over. The other issue too is, like, you know, like a 50-year-old vine, you can't bend a 50-year-old vine. You know, so that's another issue that these guys are, are facing. So most wineries do not grow their own grapes. They contract farmers to do that. And we'll see some issues with that here in the future. And so this farmer, he's really, really proud of these grapes, as they are the highest quality, and they're thin to, I forgot to translate it, 400 kilograms per hectare. So what's that in? Well, I mean, that's a pretty good thinning of the grapes. So he's got the highest quality grapes. You know, take a look at his pruning shears.
Did they bring Europeans to show them the process?
Yes, and we'll cover that actually. That's a very, very good question. Very, very much so. And in fact, like, all these grapes are going to be going to a winery that's run by one of my friends, actually, a French winemaker that really knows his stuff. Okay, and so here's how they carry their harvested grapes from the vineyards in Xinjiang. And notice, I mean, like, they don't have to carry the grapes up some steep hill like we saw in Yunnan. I mean, this area is just dead flat. So one of the things that I try to do is, like, again, 20 words of Chinese doesn't go a long ways, except with I know how to negotiate taxi cab guys. So I try to make my few words of Chinese go a long ways to kind of interact with the workers. You know, and it always amazed me. I've traveled all around the world, and sometimes foreigners, you encounter hostility. Never once have I ever encountered hostility in China. Never once. And never once has anybody ever asked me for something, you know, like begging or anything like that. And in fact, it's the other way around, is they're giving me stuff. You know, some little trinket, or they're giving me some food, or, here, have you tried this grape here? You know, so it's like the experience there for me has been absolutely phenomenal, you know, with the people. So the grapes, it's off to the winery. And I want you to notice who's doing the pushing here. It's the wife. And so the biggest buyer of grapes in this whole Xinjiang area is CITIC Winery. And one of the things that they've just installed is this fence and these tire spikes here, so that they can prevent terrorists from driving trucks or cars, you know, into the winery and blowing it up. So, I mean, people are thinking about that, you know, out there, even the poor wineries. And so this place is a huge factory-like operation. And here's where the grapes are unloaded and automatically weighed and destemmed. And the lower quality grapes arrive in dump trucks, you know, complete with leaves and stuff like that. And the higher quality grapes, well, you're supposed to go forward. The higher quality grapes are arriving in these, you know, in the baskets, more like what we see here in Oregon. And you notice that there's no leaves in this. They pick them out, else they don't get paid like the highest quality. So then it's off to one of the production areas, and there's a total of 6 of them. And so this is my friend Fred. He's the winemaker, and this is production manager. And I want you to notice that they're wearing harnesses up here on this catwalk that's above the fermenting tanks. And here's why. It's a long, long ways down there. Those little specks, those are workers down there. And there's miles and miles of pipes, you know, so think about like the challenge of hooking that hose from one pipe to another. And if you do the wrong thing, the pump over, you're overfilling one tank. I mean, you've got to be accurate. You can't, there's no 98%. It's got to be 100%. And so here's the production manager, and he had built like this control panel to kind of help with, you know, some of that, that pumping. And one of the things that amazes me about photography is like photographers have a lot of control over people. You can either make people feel incredibly good or you can destroy them. And like this guy here, I told him I wanted to take your photograph in front of this control panel that you, and I couldn't get that proud smile off his face. I mean, I'm there 5 minutes and he kept that proud smile on his face for 5 minutes. So you photographers out there, you have a lot of power. So most of CITIC's production goes into bulk wine that goes all to the big wineries throughout China. And they go in tanker cars. I mean, that's the kind of bulk we're talking about. But Fred does make some really nice high-end wine, and those are obviously aged in French oak barrels.
Did you skip the part where the peasant girls?
Excuse me? Pardon me?
Did you skip the part where the peasant girls stuck on the barefoot?
You know, we try to cover that in the European part, but actually there is like one incredible sculpture in front of one winery that does have Chinese women stomping grapes. You know, but it's a statue. I've never ever seen it in real life. So, yeah. So you know, and I can tell you which winery to go see if you have to go see that. Okay, so this is the CITIC winemaker, and this guy, or to answer somebody. Asked about, like, do they hire experts on this thing? And like the Chinese wineries are smart enough to hire both winery and vineyard experts. And they come especially from Australia and from France. And so my friend Fred is from the Loire Valley in France. And so CITIC hired him 11 years ago to run this Xinjiang operation. And think about this. He had never been to China, let alone out there, out in the west in Xinjiang, you know, and how many people here have been to Xinjiang? Yeah, I mean, you know what it's like. I mean, it's the wild, wild west, you know, out there. And so, like, I'm trying to put myself in his place, and I'm thinking, God, it must be like going from New York to Antarctica or something like that, you know, or New York to Salem. Sorry, Salem people. And so Fred, when he arrived, he spoke no Chinese. And now he's fluent in Chinese, and he's even married a Chinese lady and has a kid. One of the things that Fred was amazed that when he arrived, his assistants that had graduated from the Chinese enology schools never tasted wine. Never tasted wine. What they do is they use chemical analysis. And so Fred had to teach all of these assistants like how to taste wine. And that took a long time, especially at the beginning. He didn't speak, you know, Chinese, or didn't speak Chinese. you know, and like, yeah. So even though that he makes most of his wine is bulk wine, his small batches of select is probably some of the most interesting wine I've ever experienced. And so people constantly ask me, do they make really good wine out there? Yes, they do. You have to be extremely selective in, you know, the wines that you choose and who makes it. We'll see a couple of other winemakers that do a good job. And so this is probably, like we're talking about tasting and stuff, this is probably an appropriate place to talk about how Marco Polo rated the Xinjiang wine. Now, you got to figure, like Marco Polo didn't have like the 100-point system that we have now, you know, and like, oh yeah, that's 98 point or that's, you know, 68 point or whatever. So he just called them fine. And he did have a recommendation. He said, if you ever get bit by a mad dog, try a Xinjiang wine. He didn't elaborate why that helped, but read his journal, it's in there. Okay, so Fred, he wants my winemaker friend, he wants to take me to a brand new winery that's out in the desert. And so we're passing this billboard, and I have no idea, and probably somebody can read this Chinese, I have no idea what it says, but they're pouring wine out in the desert here to water this plant. I don't get it. But this is the kind of landscape that we're going to be going to or through. Yeah, can somebody read that?
Yes.
What is it? What does the billboard say?
Big, beautiful is hiding in the among the wild.
So why are they using wine? Why are they pouring wine? Well, I don't. Oh, fabulous, because that's exactly where we're going to go. Oh, that's fabulous. Well, well, you can call them up then. I don't highly recommend their wines, but wait till you see the winery. So here's the winery. And the thing that amazed me, I mean, this is the true Chinese frontier spirit where it's still possible to build your dreams. Now, in terms of the architecture, you know, I'm not sure how to classify this particular dream. And so these are the proud owners. And again, just take one moment here about photography. Just looking at this photograph, tell me, who's the boss of this operation here? I mean, she was in control. Okay, so this area gets less than 3 inches of rain per year on a good year. On a good year. Okay, so this is the kind of landscape that we're walking through. And yet their dream is to build a resort winery where visitors could come out and vacation and enjoy wine. And so one of the things that they had to do is you have to have a lake out there. So they dug a lake and filled it with water out in the desert, and then they imported all these, you know, white geese to be part of the landscape. I mean, it blows me away. Like, we're out in the dusty, sandy desert. They planted about, I'm not very good at judging acreage, but they planted about 30 acres of a forest so people can go out and be in the forest. You know, obviously it needs water, and the water comes from wells. And they're even trying to grow a lawn out there. You know, picture the Mojave Desert. And so like drip irrigation, I mean, you know, like this is their vineyard, or one of the vineyards. And drip irrigation, I mean, the whole place is laced with drip irrigation. And so here's one of the vineyards. So notice again how the vines are planted in these ditches so they can flip the dirt over to bury it in the winter. And then another thing is, like, I didn't quite understand this because my Chinese is real limited, but look at all the plastic they use for weed control. I mean, like, we're talking acres and acres of plastic out there. So I had to admire this couple for this big dream and their conquer the frontier kind of spirit. But I'm standing there, it's springtime. During the day, it's warm. I mean, I'm wearing shorts and short sleeve shirt, and you know, if I thought it was proper, I'd take off my shirt. I mean, it's hot. But then in the spring, when the sun goes down, it kind of cools down. And I kept wondering, what happens if the wells run dry? I mean, that's a lot of water that these guys are using out here. And there's other agriculture, you know, out in this area. And the owners, I'd ask the owners, and they adamantly insisted, that'll never happen. It'll never, never, ever happen. And I kept thinking, I didn't say this, but I kept thinking, you know, here in the United States, during our frontier days, didn't we learn about, like, resources weren't unlimited? And all this water's coming from the Tian Shan Mountains, you know, percolating underground. And what happens with, you know, global climate change, and there's going to be less snow, and you know, anyway, so I had to admire these guys for their spirit. So we go from one water feature to another. This is Chateau Changyu Baron Balboa, and it's built only to market wine. Wait until you see their art. So here's the general manager, and he's holding up a copy of my book, which looks pretty good here, huh? And this is another Changyu winery, and Changyu just happens to be the largest winery in China. Okay? And Changyu has built 4 of these chateaus. Here's one of them that's 1 hour out of Beijing. This one is way out in the west in Xinjiang. And so, welcome to Fairyland. You know, another wedding couple. I mean, these wedding couples are just lined up out here waiting. There's certain photographers must have, you know, little X's. You know, you pose here, stand here, go to the next X. Like they're just lined up waiting to get onto the next X. And they do actually make wine here. And I actually had, from one of the chateaus, their 2008 Cabernet Sauvignon was actually, I would say it was pretty darn good. But the rest of it is like, you know, like table wine kind of quality. I mean, you'd have it like with your dinner or something like that. So this walkway is meant for tourists to kind of walk between the barrel cellar, all new French oak, and a Chinese-made bottling line. And it was really funny because, like, afterwards I'm outside, and one of the workers kind of came up to me and told me that this bottling line was awful. It just was junk. And that's why most of the wineries use like German, Italian, French, you know, equipment in the wineries. And in fact, I had one experience in one winery where I was photographing this Chinese-made bottling line. And no offense to Chinese-made stuff. I mean, they're doing other stuff that's really good. And like all of a sudden, bottles started falling off the line. And I had to stop doing photography to help them catch the bottles so they wouldn't break onto the floor. So I think in some things, the Chinese still have a ways to go. So in this Disneyland-like winery is covered with art. None of it is Chinese. And so the idea is to emulate culture, and if possible, French. Because to the Chinese, on the mainland, to the unsophisticated Chinese, Europe, and especially France, good wine equals France. Simple as that. And Anne, you were talking about sculptures. This sculpture is an exact copy of one of the sculptures at Versailles, except instead of a staff, he's holding, you know, a cup, and he's loaded with grapes here. But it's an exact copy of a Versailles. So I'm not sure how this musician, this sculpture of this musician, you know, sells wine or anything like that, but it's out there in their garden. And so the middle-class Chinese visitors love taking photographs. Man, they've got their iPhones and their, what's the other brand? The Samsung. they're out there taking phones or their photographs. And so I can understand like erecting, a photographer statue, but I don't get why you have a dog head on there. So there's some things that I'm just not getting yet in the Chinese culture. Well, maybe so. I mean, yeah. But I knew that if a photographer's there, this has got to be the best place to take a photograph. So I had to take a photograph too. Okay, so next we're going to go to from Xinjiang in this area here, and we're going to go to here, to Ningxia. And again, like here's the Yellow River, really an important river. And so it's officially called the Ningxia Wei Autonomous Region. And you can see that landscape there. And they have a vision of converting that into a vineyard. Look at it and marvel. So this is the Yellow River here. And here's the landscape. And these are rice paddies here that are flooded from water. And this absolutely blew me away. These are apartment buildings. They're totally surrounded by rice paddies that are, filled with water. It's like this little island. And there's, gosh, I mean, what, like 300 apartment buildings in that little island? Maybe 200. Somebody can count that. And so here's Yinshuan. It's the capital. And the place is booming. And when I asked, my local friends, well, how long is it going to take to fill these apartments? I mean, those are big apartments. And they said, oh, probably, a month or two, they'll be all full. And what's happening here in Ningxia is the air is clean, there's a lot of jobs out there, and so people are moving out there by the hordes. Here's downtown Yinshuan. How many people here have been to Yinshuan, Ningxia? One person. So here's the landscape, and those are people down there. The mountains in the background back there are the Helan Mountain, Helan Shan. Oh, and nothing has ever been planted in this area before. I mean, it's like virgin desert. And so while we're going across this pan here, it's hot. It's searing hot. You can feel it on your skin. It's searing your skin. The air is so dry that your nose is just kind of drying up. And this is, let's see, at the end of May. Okay, your nose is drying up. If you're not careful, you've got a sunburn just like that. And yeah, in fact, one of the Chinese winemakers was complaining he had to work out in the vineyard for a day, and he was complaining about the sunburn he got in one day. And this is a dust storm that's fierce enough to sandblast your car. So the dream is to build a wine culture corridor. And the Ningxia government wants this to look like a Napa, like Highway 29 or Silverado Trail. And the scenery is beautiful. I mean, these mountains are absolutely gorgeous. And so these struggling little trees alongside the route, they're watered by $1 million drip irrigation system that the Israelis installed. $1 million just to keep the trees alongside the road alive. And this northwest-looking building, that's the new headquarters of the Ningxia Winery Association. Now, that looks pretty nice, right? Here's where it's located. Not a lot going on out there. This is a vineyard that's planted here. Let's see, can I see that?
What is the water source then? Wells again?
Actually, they've got these irrigation ditches that the government has built to pump water out of the Yellow River to this area. This project is huge. It's huge. And like the irrigation ditches are as wide as this building here that they're building out there. It's huge. This whole project is huge. So a French company has planted this particular vineyard, and obviously their sign shows kind of an optimistic future, here.
How many years before they expect this to come to production?
Well, production, like these vines planted this year, in 4 years, like you can get your first crop. So, probably like in 10 years, they're expecting, like being a Napa-like situation. And like they've got thousands of people working out there. One thing too, for people that like looking for where's Waldo, one of the things in the Helenshan, the mountains here, is like, take a look at this. I mean, to me that looks like a face profile, right? Keep looking for it. That for the people that are kind of dozing off, that'll keep you awake. Okay, keep looking for it. So this is Emma Gao, and she's a incredibly passionate winemaker in China. She went to France to study. She learned French. She graduated after learning French in a year. She graduated with honors from one of the best enology schools in all of France, and she even married one of the best winemakers in France. And so her operation isn't this big, huge corporate kind of a thing. This is she and her dad working in the winery, and they live right there. That's their house. So the winery is just kind of part of the house compound. And the amazing thing is, like, it's mostly she and her dad that are doing the work, except at harvest, when they have a whole army of volunteers. We'll take a look at them. So here's her mother commuting around the small winery with her bicycle. And as I mentioned, most Chinese winemakers rely on chemical analyses to determine the quality of wine. But, there's Emma. She's tasting her wine. So here's Emma leaving the family, winery compound, and she's going to go out to check on harvest. And I want you to notice, like, these huge apartment buildings. That's Yinshuan. And Yinshuan, the city, wants them to move out so they can build more apartments where she is. So I'm tagging along with Emma out to the vineyards. And Emma's been contracting with farmers for her grapes since she started. Emma is probably one of the best winemakers in all of China. So again, you can see the crops that are grown in between, and you can also see the mound here that when the winter comes, like, they'll bury their vines with the earth.
Dennis, who turned you on to Emma? Your French friend, or?
Oh, I don't know. It's like after a while, like, you start nosing around, and she was actually one of my first contacts because she speaks English. And so
She's small, right? I mean, it's small.
It's a small operation, yeah. But if you can ever get, like, her wines are only available in China. If you can ever get Silver Heights, get it. It's great. It is really good stuff.
Did her husband also move to China?
Actually, he did. He quit his job. I mean, he was with a very famous winery in France. He quit, and now lives in China. He doesn't speak any Chinese. Fortunately, Emma speaks French, and I hung out with him quite a bit. And my French is pretty limited, but we sure had a good time. So some of the grapes here, like you can see, aren't of the greatest quality, and they don't necessarily care a lot about. A lot of the farmers just want to get the crop in before it might rain or before it gets cold.
You mentioned dust storm at one point. That was this area, wasn't it?
Actually, this area here, where this is like they have so much agriculture going on here that they don't have dust storms in this area. It's in that new wine region that the government wants to become like the Napa of Ningxia, is that where the dust storms are.
And how's that going to work out?
that's a good question. You know, let's see in 5 years what you know, what it looks like. So this is, you know, people always ask me, you know, like why they wear masks, and it's just for dust control. Although, like, I've never worn a mask, and the only place I've ever experienced dust was out there, you know, like in the new wine region.
Can you tell the quality of grapes when you taste it?
The quality?
Of grapes,
Yes, I taste with a lot of winemakers, so yes.
so you can tell.
Yes, yeah. And also like looking at the seeds and looking at the pulp, and I guess I've been fortunate that a lot of winemakers and a lot of vineyard managers have taught me a lot. They think that I know something, so they try to teach me a little bit more. I also know all the technical terms for all the diseases, vineyard diseases in Chinese. So that's pretty good, huh?
So is the green grapes make white wine and the purple grapes make red wine?
Generally speaking, yes. Yeah. And notice I qualified that because there's other things that you can do. Okay, so this is a vineyard farmer, and with his really smug look. I mean, this guy was a smug guy, and Emma is getting grapes from this guy. But this guy, like maybe a day or two before harvest, you have a contract with him. A day or two before harvest, somebody offers, you know, like 100 RMB more. You know, that's like, let's see, 15 bucks more. And he'll say, oh, contract's worthless, I'm going with this new guy. And Emma is left with no grapes. And that's happened to her over and over. A couple of years, she's just not had enough grapes, you know, to make the kind of wine. So, you know, there's the guy. And so, like, Emma and her family, what they finally ended up doing is buying some land out there in that new wine corridor. And you can see again is like the vines, it's a little hard to tell, this is taken at noon, but the vines are, you know, like down in little valleys, and then they will throw the dirt over. So these are the rocks that, you know, are taken out of one of her vineyards. Oh, you know, like Waldo guys. And so irrigation, we talked about that. Irrigation is crucial, especially for these young vines. And it all comes from the Yellow River.
Why do pigs such treacherous places to plant grapes?
Because they think that the climate and the soil are ideal. And there's actually a lot of people, a lot of really good winemakers that agree. That's why the French, you know, we saw that one French vineyard out there. The French are planting out there. There's a lot of foreign companies that are planting vines out there because they think it's, you know, right now it's supposed to be the hottest new wine region in China. And so Emma and her father, they built like housing for the vineyard workers, which is like a real noble thing. Hey, and you Waldo guys, did you happen to see that, huh? Okay, and here, this is the vineyard manager and his wife for Emma's Vineyards. And like these guys, again, it's like I'm just amazed. It's like they invited us for lunch. You know, and it was just a really a nice, humble, you know, thing to do. Of course, we had to look at, you know, like the wine book, because Emma is in the wine book, my little wine book. So here's, like, even though she makes some of the best wine in all of China, you know, like this is a down-home operation. And every year, this group of volunteers comes from all over China to help her, not with the picking, but with the processing. You know, it's like picking out bad grapes, you know, doing that kind of stuff, during the production kind of thing. One of the things in China, nothing goes to waste. So these are grape skins and seeds that the winery throws out. I mean, they're throwing it out right there. And so it goes through this cylindrical screen, and the grape seeds drop down, and the skins stay up in that cylindrical screen. And so these are grape seeds. And I'll say, I wasn't going to say this, but you can tell like how ripe a grape is from the seeds. These red seeds mean that the grape was ripe. These green seeds mean the grape was not ripe. So you'll see, if you know any winemakers, they'll go out and they'll look at the seeds to see how ripe the grape is. So you've just learned a winemaking secret. Don't say you never learned anything here. And so, like the grape seeds are put out, you know, on the concrete road so that searing sun can dry them out. And then they're used for cosmetics and cooking oils. And if somebody wants to count like the number of seeds that are here, you know, I can leave the slide up. So the next winery that we're going to visit it's a handcrafted dream of one man. And it's also the place where I fell. I hit my head hard against a wall, got a concussion, and because of the concussion, I discovered something I would have never expected. So the winery is built on the land the owner grew up on. And the stone all comes from the area, and all of the workers are local guys. And this guy told me that it's going to take him 3 days to carve that one stone. And so here's the owner, Mr. Yuan, and he was into traditional Chinese tea ceremonies. So every time I wanted to go ask him a question, I'd have to allow an extra hour to go through this whole ceremony. And that's just the way business is done. So here's the winery. It's just a beautiful piece of work. Topping off in the cellar. One of the tasting rooms. It's pretty nice, huh? And so here's the dining room. And I was so excited to photograph this dining room. I was going down these stairs here, and somehow I tripped, bashed my head against that wall, and it's all stone. You know, so stone, you know, like as probably most of you know, is pretty hard. And man, I hit my head hard against that stone. And when I got up, I was kind of dazed, and I found my head was bleeding. And so the next morning, I'm alone in my hotel room, and I realized I had a concussion. And so I couldn't go out, like if you've ever had a concussion, you can't go out in the bright sun with a concussion. It hurts. And so, and I had to cancel, and this was the hardest part. I'm type A to the severe nth degree. I had to cancel my appointment with a winery because I couldn't go outside. And it was a nice big winery too, one of the most important ones. And so what am I going to do, you know, with my concussion? So I decided to go ahead, like 2 blocks away was this government building. And so I figured, well, I can put on my sunglasses and I'll go into this government building. And what I found was a museum. And in this museum were petroglyphs and rubbings of petroglyphs from the Tin Shan Mountains that, are not, Helanshan Mountains that we saw, you know, the Waldo profile. Like there are these caves up there that have these petroglyphs. I never even knew about these petroglyphs. I spoke to somebody earlier that had actually seen some of these petroglyphs. I guess you were up in that area. You know, I was blown away. And the thing that, this was like an incredible inspiration for me because like I'm working on this Africa project. And, you know, like it was perfect inspiration for that Africa project. And so my lesson from this was, yeah, one door closed. I didn't get to see that really big, important winery. But I mean, look what opened up just because I was open to possibilities. So at the beginning of the show, I mentioned like vineyard workers, and we saw a photograph of this lady that just was incredibly kind every time I saw her. And so during my 5 years of travel throughout China, like I would encounter these vineyard workers like this lady that were always helpful to me like I'm traveling by myself. You know, and if you've ever traveled by yourself, you know, it's nice to have like somebody help you out, you know, occasionally. And they kind of reminded me about a lesson that I learned in Africa 15 years ago from an elder in a tribe that was really remote in Ethiopia. And it's so remote, the elder had heard of Europe, but he didn't know about the United States 15 years ago. That's remote. And so one of the questions I asked this elder, or these elders, was, what advice would you tell me to give to leaders around the world? He thought about it for a minute, and then he said, you know, tell them that we all have 5 fingers. And what he was saying is that we're all the same. Doesn't matter our culture. It doesn't matter, you know, like our religion. Underneath all of that, we're all the same. So we all have 5 fingers. Okay, any questions? Man, that ran long, sorry. I talk too much. Any kind of thoughts, questions? What'd you get?
So when are we going to start importing?
You know, like the Chinese wineries are not at all, at this time, interested in export. Their market is like in the last, like the statistics are phenomenal. It's like their average wine consumption, including Hong Kong and Shanghai, I think is something like now it's up to a half a liter. I think France consumes, I think it's 47 liters of wine per year. So like these wineries are thinking, God, look at this growth potential that we have. And it's grown, like I think over the last 5 years, consumption has increased, as I recall, about 136 or 138%. That's a huge growth. They don't care about the United States.
Could you step back?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, and I'm supposed to stay in the spotlight, too, to be filmed. Sorry, Ann.
So what does the woman with the really great wine get for a bottle of wine, and would it behoove her to export and get a jump on the?
She's not interested in that. She doesn't, the volume isn't big enough that she's interested in exporting. And her wine, I've never bought her wine, but I would estimate that, you know, it's probably pretty reasonable from like, in US dollars, you know, like it's at the upper end, $125 to $250 a bottle. It's available like at upper end restaurants and at the upper end hotels.
So she's doing well with what she's getting.
She's
for
actually
the-
a brilliant marketer. She knows what she's doing. She used to work for Torres in China, so she knows her stuff, and actually Torres is helping her. Yeah.
So you mentioned this at the beginning, this little village that basically the Shangri-La winery,
Qizhong.
had basically convinced all the
Oh,
farmers
they-
to replant to vineyards.
To some of their to not grow totally food crops, they'll grow some cash crops.
Oh, okay, so they're still growing some food.
Absolutely, they have to. That's you know, there's no Walmart out there.
Well, that's what I was wondering. I
Yeah.
mean, how, you know, if they convert completely to wine.
They can't do it. They have to grow their. Yeah, they're totally self. I mean, they'll go. You know, like for Qizhong, let's see, how long does it get to the nearest town? Maybe a day and a half of driving. Yeah, although they're building a new road in there, you know, right now. So,
And how much is government kind of funded or compared to the small wineries? And are they allowing the small wineries to exist with it, or is it all, you know, kind of a government infusion?
the answer to your second question, are they allowing small wineries to exist? Absolutely. The first question is like, how much is government owned? Let me think about this. Most of the big wineries are at least partially owned. Some of them, what the government will do, like Changyu, what they'll do is they'll get outside investors, like that one winery that's just 1 hour out of Beijing. They call it Chateau Changyu Global AFIP. AFIP means that American, French, Italian, and Portuguese investors were involved in that particular winery also. We saw, like, I don't know if you remember, like we saw like this big broad landscape, and I showed you a picture of Lafitte's new vineyard out there. And if you don't know, it's like Lafite is one of the most famous wineries in all of France. If you can get with an empty bottle of Lafite with a good label on it, I can sell it for $200, an empty bottle in China, and they'll fill it up with their stuff. You know, so that's like the cachet that Lafitte has. But, you know, like that's a joint venture with a Chinese winery. It's easier to do business. Across the way, we saw that Scottish castle. The guy did it on his own. But he's a very savvy businessman, speaks fluent Chinese, and he knows what he's doing. He knows China really well. So yeah, there's a lot of the wineries. Sitik, that big one where my friend Fred works, that's all government owned. It's huge, huge operation. Yes?
How do they control the quality? Like, for instance, all this film, I see that the Europeans, the Italians especially, they protect their family grape plants for generations, and just to protect the quality of the wine. And in China, they will buy the grapes from the nearby farmers. How do they?
And that's a
I see that guy saying that he was, telling the farmers to have a better quality of grapes.
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. And you have to remember, too, like wine in China, like Western style wine in China, even though Marco Polo tasted some way back when, it's a new phenomenon. And it's only because like there's a middle class that's getting wealthy enough, and wine right now, the French came in and convinced the Chinese that wine is one of the luxury items you absolutely need to have. And so it's a luxury item. And the Chinese, for the Chinese, it's really important. And like these, yeah.
So they do not care about
Well, they do. And that's why, like Sitik, like in Xinjiang, like that farmer that was holding the grapes, that was the highest quality grape because he thinned his grapes and like he watched like how they grew the grapes. Like he was very careful. And if you looked at his grapes, except for the second shot, he had some raisin grapes. But the stuff that he was holding, they were very nice grapes. And so thinning and watching the quantity. And then when they pick, it's like he's walking through the vineyard. He's not really picking himself, but he's walking through, picking out leaves, picking out all that kind of stuff. Because, 3 leaves in a crate, man, your price goes way down because of that. So, it depends on what level you're aiming for. For bulk wine, you saw that dump truck, dumping grapes in. There was leaves, all kinds of stuff. Here we call that, whole cluster fermentation. But in China they call it, low quality wine. I don't know if you know what the whole cluster fermentation is, but yeah. So does that answer your question?
somewhat. Thank you.
Yeah, it varies. And again, it's like, it's such a young industry. They're learning. The Chinese are really learning. And that's why you see so many Aussies working there. You see so many French working there. One Greek, I've met one Greek. So like there's experts coming from around the world to help them, to educate them.
But if you like, the technology transfer is really by importing foreigners into China more than, like, for example, Emma going to France to learn.
Some of the wine, like there was another in Ningxia, I remember, like really a neat guy. He went to France to study too. So there are people, going to France. In fact, last time I was in France, I get a text from a Chinese lady, and she said, "Was that you I saw over there photographing in Burgundy?" Yeah, that was me. Well, I'm in China now. I'm studying. So I had met her in China, and so she texted me because she was studying in China. So a lot of people are going there. Like France is the model. Yeah.
Are they all using chemicals now? Are they using biodynamics and
It ranges. Like I know of at least one biodynamic vineyard. I know of a number of organic vineyards, and then I also know vineyards that pour so much chemistry in there, it would kill a horse. And I don't know, about that wine. So it varies the whole gamut. And I think more and more, like the Chinese, especially in the wine industry, are becoming aware that they want to not use so much chemistry. I mean, they've had so many disasters with chemistry in China, so they're trying to get away from that. Any other questions? Okay, now that I put you all to sleep. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. So if you want to, like learn more about Chinese wines, like in the captions, I try to be really, if you're a real wine guy or wine person, there's a lot of technical information in there. And there's also a map that Greg Jones out of Southern Oregon did. It's the first map ever published of the Chinese, what do they call that? Like the heat units in all of China. It's just an interesting map if you look at it. It's the first time it's ever been published. All right, thank you.